What is money?
What is money?
What is money?
That is really the first question and the great question. And I spent 20 years as a financial planner doing investment management. You would have thought I understood what money was. And it wasn't until I left the business that I realized I didn't really understand money. I was operating, and most of us are operating within a system that we think we know what money is, but we don't really think behind the money, what is it supposed to represent? And so that was the journey that I went on first, and it really started after I decided to sell my practice. COVID had just hit, and the world seemed very different, and everything that I understood as an investment professional no longer made sense. So for example, in the investment business, and if you're doing stocks and things like that, you know, a company comes out and misses earnings by a penny and the stock goes down. Well, how can you shut an entire economy down for 3 months, 6 months, 2 years? Corporations dramatically having less earnings and stock prices go up. That makes no sense. So I had to dig deeper, like, wait a minute, something is fundamentally wrong here in my understanding of what's going on. And so I began to do a lot more digging to think about what really is money. And most of us just think, well, money is a euro, a dollar, a yuan. It's something issued by a government, something controlled by a central bank. That's what money is. We've all grown up not knowing anything different. So why should we question it? And why should we look a little deeper? Because that's just what money is.
So without any sort of reflection, just like a child that gets the first coin, the impression is that the coin itself has some value. I guess like if it was a piece of precious metal, and then I give it to you for that value. But once the actual coin or paper has not intrinsically that value, what gives it value is a whole system. And that system is, I guess, what we call money.
Well, and so we have to think about what money is really supposed to represent. Okay. Because money is really just a technology to store, account for, or transmit value between people who create something of value. And that's what's often missed is, you know, money was a way to solve the problem of, I'm a chicken farmer, I have eggs, I have, you know, dozens of eggs every day, all right? And I want to trade them with somebody because I want a dress or I want broccoli. Well, they may not need all the eggs that I produce. They may not want them. They may have their own chickens, but I'd like their broccoli. So how do we trade and do business? Now, if you were in a small tribal community where there was a chicken farmer and there was somebody who grew vegetables and there was somebody who grew potatoes and there was somebody who sewed clothes, you might just be able to barter and trade amongst yourselves. But when societies grew larger, and obviously now when we have international trade, we need a technology to be able to work with each other and exchange value. And different things throughout history have been used in this. Seashells, tobacco, ultimately gold, the coin, as something that had intrinsic value. And, you know, that's an interesting word. We think of it as there's somehow something innately valuable about gold.
It's scarcity only, right?
That's it. It's what makes a good money. Well, if I was trying to use pebbles that I picked up off the ground as money, They're not scarce. Anybody can pick up pebbles. I can do no work and hand you a bunch of pebbles. Why are you going to give me a dozen eggs for what you could pick up off the ground? It really has no value. So the value is something that we assign to it because it's useful. And gold became useful as a good money because, one, it's very hard to find and mine. It is indestructible. All right, what gold was produced is here. It's not like iron, which rusts away. So it has qualities that make a good money. And that's why, over the years, 5,000 years or so, it became a dominant form of money for trade all over the world. Now, governments got involved because there are always people scamming out there. If somebody gives you what they claim is gold, how much does it weigh? Is it really pure gold? Is it 10 karat or is it 24 karat? And so governments tended to create these coins as a way of ensuring that what you see is what you get. This is pure gold. You know, a coin of this size weighs so many grams so that you can easily trade. You don't have to measure every time someone hands you a coin. Governments and emperors, being what they were always wanted to stamp the picture of the emperor on the coin. But emperors, to run their governments, would often find that they didn't have as much gold as they wanted to spend in their kingdom to give benefits to people, to buy things, what have you. So they started actually shaving little bits of the gold off. So, you know, a coin that was supposed to be 6.5 grams now was 6.3 grams, or they started adding some other metals to it. And that way they could spend more than they wanted to. But the bottom line is, what is money? It's simply a technology. So I think that's critically important because we have to think about it not as some thing that is given by a government. It is simply a technology. And over time, better technologies have served as better money. Shells, tobacco, silver, gold, etc. Now, the reason we got into these paper bills was simply because gold as a technology has a couple of problems. It's heavy. It's not easily divisible. It's easy to steal. And, you know, if you're transporting gold, you can be robbed of it. And so bankers, often it started in Venice and Italy and in other places, began to say, I'm going to give you a receipt, a piece of paper that is equivalent to the ounce of gold that I'm holding, and you can just use this piece of paper. It's much easier to carry.
But originally it would be under the promise that the piece of gold that is represented by the piece of paper would be stored somewhere physically.
Exactly. It represented something that was sound or hard money,
And
this
could be
gold.
traced. You give me that piece of paper and both of us would know that this represents a piece of gold that is stored in that place, in whoever lord, banker that is keeping it for us safe. Yeah?
Correct. And this takes us a little bit deeper into banking and money than necessarily.
One of the questions I wanted to ask is what is a bank? But we can go there as you prefer.
Well,
later on.
You know, I mentioned Venice. So what started is people would keep ledgers and say, okay, you've given me 10 ounces of gold. I've given you a piece of paper that represents those 10 ounces. I'm going to write it on a ledger book. Okay, you've deposited 10 ounces with me. I've given you a piece of paper, a receipt for that you can trade with others. At some point, as they got a lot of gold from a lot of different people, what they realized is, you know what? Nobody ever comes and asks for all the gold I have back at the same time. So, you know, I could probably loan out pieces of paper and create money, all right, and collect interest on it beyond the amount of gold I actually have. Because
That is literally inventing something out of nothing, right?
exactly.
The way you explain it is there was nothing and someone makes value that doesn't really exist.
Exactly. You are expanding the money beyond the gold that you have.
In the moment of doing that, you're making yourself richer just by a good idea.
Yes, because with your reserves of gold, people trust you that if they want to cash in this piece of paper for gold, you will have the gold. And, you know, if you keep 90% of the reserves of the paper out there, chances are you're fine. We're now at the point where we have 0 to 10% in central banks of gold for the pieces of paper out there.
And is still gold what it is account for?
It accounts for absolutely nothing other than the faith and trust of the government
But it's
that is
supposed
issuing
to,
it.
in theory, it's supposed to be a backing of the paper money with gold.
Well, that got severed around the world at different times.
Okay.
A piece of history in the United States that most people don't understand or throughout the world is that when the U.S. was coming through the Great Depression, the whole world economy was down. We had fought World War I, and they were spending more money than they had gold. This was becoming a problem. So the president at that time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, issued an order and said, if you privately own gold, you have to turn it into us, and we'll exchange it for a piece of paper.
So they removed the possibility of
Private ownership of gold. Okay. My grandfather was a Ukrainian immigrant tailor who had lived through difficult times in the Ukraine, and he was a hard worker, and he tried to keep his money in savings in gold. And my brother tells of hearing the story about him being pretty upset when the government of the land he'd moved to made him turn in his money for exchange for pieces of paper. And then during World War II, again, the need for money expanded. They said, the pieces of paper are basically worth, your gold is worth 40% less than the pieces of paper we originally issued. Fast forward a few more years, the paper money of the U.S. and most central banks around the world was theoretically convertible into gold, okay? But generally only not for individuals, because individuals have been banned in the U.S., for example, but for governments. So as the U.S. was spending more money than other governments knew they had in reserves, Charles de Gaulle in France sent ships to New York to say, I'll take our gold.
I knew this, yeah.
And then the U.S. started running out of its gold. And so finally in 1971, President Nixon said, international governments, you can't convert your paper into gold anymore.
And is that kind of coincidental with when you change into the petrodollar whole situation?
Then you get into the oil shortages, and then you have the whole petrodollar situation where you replace it with an agreement that says oil has to be traded in dollars. And now dollars were required by everybody all over the world to buy oil.
So then, if I understand correctly, what backed the money, let's say that it would be a brick of gold, eventually that brick of gold was substituted by different degrees of trust in your power to be in the position to return the money that my paper says that I have. So whether it is because you are militarily strong or because you're, in this case, everybody has to buy the oil in dollars, so that assures that your economy will always be strong. That is what assures me that you will eventually meet the expectations of this bill. But it's a matter of me trusting in your abilities to deliver the payment instead of that brick that in itself had some sort of value. Yeah. So I'm trusting more and more something that you tell me.
So you said a key phrase there, the expectation of this money, of this bill. So what is your expectation when you take a piece of paper and you hold it, and 10 years from now, you want to do something with that? What is your expectation?
So I think you have basically, let's say, two. The first one is that whichever is the number that says in my bank account, if one day I go to the bank and I say, give me all of it, that I should be able to get it, yeah? And the second is that the value of this piece of paper in some sort of way would be, we would be able to trust that it gives me the same amount of milk or similar. But inflation destroyed that, right?
Correct. And I think that's the fundamental thing which we have all been sold, this idea from economists basically in the last 100 years.
That inflation is inevitable.
Right, who stand in front of, podiums in suits and sound smart, and they have all these meetings, and they've convinced us that inflation is just a natural course of events. It's not.
It's engineered somehow, right?
It is required by a system that a government is creating more money than the goods and services of its economy. So let's just go back. That expectation. This is why money is just a technology, okay? It's a technology to store, account for, and transmit value. So you mentioned account for. If I have $100 in the bank, they'll give me $100 back. If I want to buy eggs, I know that I can exchange, and there's a common medium of exchange to account eggs versus steak or clothing.
We use this for everything. If we agree that this thing is called sofa, and then tomorrow I call it table, we would not be able to communicate. So there is an expectation of stability in the agreements that we have taken, and that is expected
Yes.
psychologically in our money as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the real thing that's important to all of us is that at some point in the future, we can take this money and convert it to something that we want to live our lives. Goods and services, eggs or steak or a house or a dress. That's what's important about money. And what that ultimately is doing is either preserving or destroying the creation of value that each of us have that we convert into this technology of money. And this is where we've, by having gone to a government system of money where they create it out of nothing, we lose that connection. We are the creators of value. I grow potatoes, somebody wants potatoes. I create a computer, somebody wants that. If you're not adding value, okay, then, and somebody wants that value, somebody sees that, then you're not doing what is necessary to even need money. And this is where I think we have gotten away from a system that understands that we all need to be adding value in whatever way. It can be art, it can be music, it can be massage, it can be, growing fruit, whatever it is, building houses. But that's an addition of value. Each of us, 8 billion people on the planet, all get to decide how much value I see in this. And trade or not trade. Some people will highly value a piece of art that others won't at all. That's the prerogative of 8 billion people. But you have to create value. Instead, by thinking that money is something independent, we have created a system where people are primarily focused on accumulating the units of money
and growing them.
And doing it by extracting value from the system. Whether it is trading for trading's sake, whether it is banking by creating money out of nothing, and then if the loans go bad, you get the government to step in and make you whole while they foreclose on the property that you couldn't pay for anymore. We have a huge culture of extraction of value. And the worst one of all is actually the governments who create this money backed by nothing.
It's like you want your body to look beautiful because you are healthy and happy, rather than, do the cosmetic thing on top when you feel shitty inside. But
right.
It's like we make a byproduct the product when it's clearly a byproduct or a technology, like you call it.
So ultimately, this is the journey that I went on in realizing what is money, and is the system of money that we have, what's good about it, what's problematic about it. And I think most of us all sense there's something that's wrong.
Well, if inflation is more of a choice than a feature, because if it is like, gravity, it just has to happen, then if we take it that way as some obscure law of economy. But if it's a feature that is built in the system, I heard the other day, I think in the 70s or 60s, a house would cost the average salary of 3 years of a person. And now we are in the average salary of I don't know if it's 15 years. So if that is built in by choice, another way to call that is stealing.
Absolutely. And if we think about it, and it's a great example.
Stealing life force almost. It's not just goods, but it's your time.
Exactly.
How many years you're going to be working to buy that house.
Exactly.
Or even it's altogether impossible, so you don't even give yourself choices that you would have wanted to have because you don't even see that it's possible, yeah?
No, you're exactly right. And I think that's what leads to much of the frustration and despair that is felt through all over the world, and it surfaces in politics. But going back to that example of housing, so let's think about, is inflation a normal part of a system, or is it something that's designed part of the system? Is it natural or not? So in the 1970s, if you were going to build a house, it took a certain amount of labor. Now, in the US, for example, they build stick-built houses, the wood frames and things like that. It's less common in other parts of Europe and other parts of the world, but it's growing. And so if you wanted to frame a house, people used a hammer and a nail, and they banged it in, okay? And it would take a long time to frame a house. We have nail guns right now. You were pouring concrete, okay? You used to do it by hand. You build the form, you got a bag, you mixed it in a wheelbarrow, somebody hauled it over, smoothed it off. Now you have big pumper trucks, they bring it in, they pump it in there to the mold, they reuse the mold. So it's a lot faster, it's a lot more efficient, so shouldn't it be a lot cheaper to build a house? It takes less time, energy, labor, and materials, So the house prices should be falling and not rising. And that's pretty much true of everything. I mean, technology and productivity, we've seen in the last 50 years, has exploded beyond anything we imagined when we were kids. It was fiction, is now reality. And all that should actually be making things cheaper. Prices should be going down. If prices were going down because of technology and productivity improvements that flowed to everyone, then life would be getting easier. You wouldn't have to work 2 or 3 jobs, all right? You might work a half a job. If the price of everything was going down, life would be getting easier. Instead, we have what's sold to us as normal inflation, where prices just naturally go up. Well, if prices should be falling because of technology and productivity improvement, but prices are going up, why? What's happening?
Someone is getting very rich.
Pardon?
Someone is getting very rich.
Some people are getting rich by extracting value, and some people are using a system that they've designed, okay, for their own purposes, not for the general welfare of everybody.
Is this global? Yes, right? This is,
Yeah, it's global.
Even if it's headlined by the states, the financial system is global now.
Yes,
You wouldn't be able to pinpoint to this other part of the world that they have a different kind of technology money and they have a different financial system. This is the whole world is under this umbrella.
Yes, and it's very easy to see. It's easier to see even outside the United States, and go back and look at both current and historical examples. So if you were in Turkey over the last few years and had the Turkish lira, you saw inflation rates of 70%. If you're in Argentina or Venezuela, you've seen huge inflation rates. You go back to Weimar Germany between the wars, when the German government, to try to pay off debts, to try to keep the system going, was just printing money. There was no gold for it. There was nothing backing it. It was pieces of paper, and they were worth nothing. People would burn them to keep warm rather than use them because you had to have a wheelbarrow full of them. So when governments really decide that we want to spend money, we want to go to war, we want to give benefits to our population, we want to make ourselves rich and powerful, and they spend more money than we as citizens are willing to contribute in taxes we know about, okay? They just print money. And we've been sold this idea that inflation is represented by some inflation index. In the US, it's CPI. The EU has its own version of the stated inflation rate of 2 or 3% or whatever. That's bullshit, okay? They control how the number is created, and they are going to control to make sure that number never seems too bad or underreports. And so the best way to look at inflation, I learned ultimately, was how much new money are governments producing, because that drives the value of your money down. This was ultimately my aha moment that drove me towards Bitcoin. I had sold my business. I had moved to Florida. COVID hit. We couldn't go anywhere. Certainly couldn't move to Europe at the time. And so we decided to buy a house. And after a year, the house value was up like 25%. I thought, yeah, gosh, what a great investment. And then I'm like, wait a minute. If I had waited a year, the money sitting in the bank would have bought me 25% less house. It's not that the house value went up, it's the value of my money went down. And inflation is the value of your money is going down.
It's one of these, these test that you can see the two buttons or the face of the person, and
Yes.
you go like, zzz, and you change
And
the
we've all
focal
been
point.
programmed, only look at this face, only look at this face. No, it's that the paper
So,
no longer has that expectation with it. Can you
but
trust
if
it?
this is by default, and entire populations kind of got the wrong idea about what it really is, that also means that by default, the natural state of the government is corruption.
Not going to get an argument out of me with it.
No, because the same way that we think, okay, so most of our governance is trying to do a good job, and then some black sheep are fucking it up by lying and stealing. But it almost feels like the machinery is built on a system that is lying and stealing, and some individuals are trying to do good things. It
Yes.
feels like it's reversed, the order.
And I worked 15 years in the government. I worked in civil rights enforcement, and I worked environmental protection in the U.S. So I've been on the inside of state and federal government. And these are not views that I always had in my life. But again, I like to use the expression of when you go through this process, your frame gets bent. Those four corners are no longer perfect. And you go like, wait a minute.
Because
I'm looking at a distorted picture.
yeah, because what I was saying, I didn't mean like you can have a bunch of really ethical workers in any sort of system, but if the software of the system is corrupted, all these people with good intentions, they will actually be corrupting in their actions, not out of their own volition, but because the system is written in this invisible ink that you cannot see. Yeah.
And, different people have different views. Different cultures are going to have different views about the role of a government, the role of shared collective responsibility versus individual. And people have a right to choose where they want to fall on that spectrum. If you want to live off the grid out in the middle of nature, if you want to live, in a different system.
In terms of finance and economy, without getting into morals or socials, or different types of repartition, you were saying before you will reflect on the fact that you have a need to add value to the system. So those areas in society where the value is more intangible, like the typical meme, what is the value of Jimi Hendrix's mother? Yeah, like she was Jimi Hendrix's mother, but she was I don't know who she was. So those things that are a little less flashy, the teachers, the nurses, the mothers, how do they get rewarded for the value that they add to the collective? Is there anything in the economy itself that can account for that, or there is where we enter into politics?
Well, actually, this is a great example, and I go into it in the book, that I think paints a deeper understanding of why money is just a technology that's useful in some circumstances and not useful in others. So within a family, for example, there may be one person that tends to be the primary caregiver if you have children, for example. And there's lots of different family units, but let's just say a traditional family unit where where one party is going off and working in the outside world, and one is staying at home and caring for the home and raising children. Well, you don't pay if it's one of your children. You don't exchange value between two partners to take care of your child. You pay a babysitter, but you don't pay a father or a mother to take care of children. Money's irrelevant there. That does not mean that value is not being added. Mm-hmm. And this is where we get corrupted by thinking that only if you make money, and when you make money, that actually it represents the value associated with it. So if you do something that makes $1 billion, you must be adding a lot of value. Perhaps you are, perhaps you're not. If you do something which nobody pays you for, perhaps you're adding value, perhaps you're not. I say in the book, I think this may be one of the sources of why so many caregivers feel devalued in the culture that we have, because they're not rewarded in these monetary units, which have become our God. And so there's a difference between value and money that we have, and we've widened that gap when we think that money represents value. Value is something that human consciousness, ascribes to things.
And money would not be the only way to reward value. As in, there is other ways to pay for value that is not money.
Yeah, I mean,
Company, relationships,
yeah. Again, in a family unit for raising children, probably the highest value and the most important job in our world comes at zero pay unless you outsource it, and then it comes at the lowest value that we give to childcare workers. Money just is irrelevant there, because you do it because you love your children. You love your spouse. Your spouse loves you and your children and wants to be able to provide a safe, comfortable environment for them to learn and grow and evolve, and be able to be the best human beings they can be over time. So ultimately, the economic and the monetary discussion is one of morals and values. And when we divorce that, we start divorcing integrity from the system. We start divorcing an understanding of what is behavior that really has integrity.
Also because not just we take the value out of it, but also we reward people that have those characteristics. The system, in order to get higher and higher at the top, it's rewarding ruthlessness.
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful here that we don't automatically jump to one side that says, oh, if you've accumulated vast amounts of wealth, all right, therefore you must be corrupt and don't have integrity and are extracting value from the system. My view is we live in an abundant universe. There's nothing wrong with prosperity, okay? Prosperity is should be an indicator of the value that we've added to humanity. And those that add tremendous value, if we live in a free market, can all exchange and say, it's really worth a lot to me to be able to have a computer, to drive a car, to do certain things, and I will pay for that. And somebody who creates a technology or a system that does better to do that. Now, in a free market, the idea is that everybody will always be competing to do something better and cheaper and faster, and that's where the money will flow. Unfortunately, we live in a very corrupted system where access to government officials, access to central banks who create money, and an ability to get money very cheaply to run your business, to be able to create monopoly structures on a regulatory framework that says, oh, only these companies who have been approved can do certain things, okay, and the rest of you can't, then government and corporations get entangled so much that we don't really have a free market. We have a very corrupt crony system. And this is true whether you look in the US and say as the pinnacle of capitalist system, or you look in Europe, or you look in China, where you might have a socialist system, but it is so intertwined with the economy, okay, that it is all a function of who gets ahead is who can intertwine power and economics. And so we have to be careful, I think, by thinking that the way to correct an injustice an inequity in this system is to redistribute all of the wealth from those who perhaps have really added value to those who maybe they actually aren't adding value, okay? As a way of bringing fairness to the system. I mean, the subtitle of my book is Creating a Path to a Freer, Fairer, and More Peaceful World. And fairer is different than equality. Everyone's equal. We've tried some of those systems and they have not worked too well.
Because they squeeze the human spirit and the freedom that we all love, and they mold us into being the same as the neighbor when no one feels that it's exactly the same as the neighbor, even though you are similar,
Yeah, yes. And so, you know, in re-examining the nature of money and how it operates in our system, then I think we have to re-examine the source of the problem and therefore the source of the solution.
Yeah.
Because I said, everybody, I think, senses, okay, unless you're at the height of the powers of control in government or corporations and technology, that something's wrong here. And politicians point to this group or this thing or that thing, you know, and they're not pointing at themselves.
Yeah.
And they never will.
So if you come there as a doctor and you say money is really ill and we have to revive or save the dollar, the euro, if the system doesn't change, could we save the dollar? Can that kind of currency, do you call it fiat currency?
Fiat currency, yeah, which is...
Can in itself be solved, or is the revelation and the realization that no, it cannot, what has brought people to, let's say, Bitcoin?
So I think, again, when you begin to step back and you understand what money is and what a good money is versus a bad money, then you begin to look at the fact that we have a bad money that does not do what your expectation is of this piece of paper. It's failing miserably. Even in the best fiat currency on the planet, the US dollar, I mean, we know that's the currency everybody uses. Since the creation of the Federal Reserve System, the central bank over 100 years ago, the dollar's lost 99% of its purchasing power. Your expectation of having a dollar and being able to buy a dollar's worth of eggs 100 years from now, well, you know.
Yeah, and homelessness is growing, and like what I hear from the ground level life in the States is that people are not happier than 50 years ago.
Yes, and I think it's true in many places of the world, that, again, something's wrong. But until we understand the nature of the problem, we can't come up with a good solution. This was something I did not understand. And so when I began to realize that the fundamental nature of the money is a problem that is fundamentally flawed and corrupted, if we don't shift the monetary system, this problem's only going to get worse.
And this movement towards, we will start now, Bitcoin, or you will explain me which kind of cryptocurrencies, is within the same system but using a different kind of technology, or is also attempting to change the actual system?
No, it's a great question. And it's fundamentally changing the system of money that we have used from a centralized system that is corruptible by those who are in control of that centralized system, government, politicians, central bankers, the very wealthy who benefit from that system, the corporate interests that entwine to extract what they can. If you can eliminate that ability of them to control the money supply, it has huge ramifications.
So let's say in a similar situation like a crisis like COVID, like you say, there would be not someone that can make more Bitcoin. That is not possible.
That is correct. That is correct. But again, if you understand the problem, and this is the hardest part, because just like I was, I thought, I thoroughly dismissed Bitcoin. I thought it was a scam. I thought it was ridiculous. I told my wife when she brought it up to me while I was still in the business, she said, what about this Bitcoin? Something's wrong here. And I'm like, if we need that, we've got a whole lot more problems. I don't buy it. So I dismissed it. So I get that entirely. And ultimately, my COVID experience, when I realized that it's not that my house price is going up, it's this money is going down, did I go, well, there's a problem with the money, so is there a better technology of money? And ultimately, better technologies win out. You can keep hold of thinking the technology of the typewriter is the best you will ever get to be able to write on, okay? And then you can throw out the idea that a PC and a word processor is a much better technology. And when you have a decentralized, permissionless, distributed system through everybody in the world that everybody can access, and these are some nuances which I understand, a lot of people don't understand, but do we want our government controlling basically the results of our work and controlling value, in essence, stealing our life force energy from us? Or do we want to try to preserve it?
In the case of a good government, probably not. In the case of the governments that we're having at the moment, surely not.
Which begs the question, show me a good government in history that even if good for a while, hasn't ultimately become rotten at its core. And I'm not saying we should live in an anarchy system. We all have reasons to share and participate with each other and to create social safety nets, to create systems where we have shared contribution to things that, infrastructure, et cetera. There can be a role for government, okay? But where do we want this pendulum to swing? As we move more towards everybody looking at the government to give them everything, we have to realize what the downside of that is.
So maybe this is a good point to bring the second question. What is Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin is simply a better technology of money. And, we are moving from an analog age, a physical age, to an age where, a digital age, where recording things, transacting, moving money, how we distribute music, etc., is so much done in a digital environment. So just as gold became cumbersome to transport 100 tons of gold across the Atlantic, all right, to buy something or to trade with, and we said paper's going to be a lot easier. So being able to transmit money 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to anyone on the face of the earth with a phone, that seems like a pretty good technology.
Is it different in that regards to a bank transaction that you do from one country to another country?
It's different in that you don't have to go through a middleman, and that's the key. There's no one controlling the centralized access point that says you have to ask your bank to send money to somebody else.
So it'd be from you to me, from me
Correct.
to you. Okay.
And whenever you ask a bank or a financial intermediary for permission, they can deny the permission, say, oh, no, I'm sorry, you can't transfer it to them because you could be money laundering. I don't know, where did you get this money from? Why are you transmitting it there? And by the way, whatever your answer is, I'm going to take some of this money from you as a fee. Mm-hmm. But if you can transmit it 24/7, person to person, all over the world. Now, for those of us who live in developed countries in Europe and in the US and much of the world, transferring money through a bank isn't that big of a deal. It's becoming a little more problematic. They're making it more and more difficult. Again, when they ask you a question of what are you doing with the money you're transferring, shouldn't that make you ask the question, well, wait a minute, if it's my money, what business is it of yours? Now, they say it's all to protect against terrorism and money laundering.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a story.
Yes.
And that way they can control it.
That sounds
And ultimately, they're the biggest role that is, we know we're going to digital. Everything we do with our money, for the most part, is digital on a phone.
So this is like a digital gold mine. So it's not physical, but it's digital, and it's an amount already. It's like 20 million or something.
21 million,
21 million. And then a certain percentage has already been extracted, and then it's a blockchain. Is kept through codes.
Yeah, there's all sorts of that. I think, when one chooses to move to a new system, it's important to get into some of those details. At the same point, when I chose to move from a landline phone to a cell phone, I didn't understand the technology. I didn't look at exactly what's a SIM card, how is it being transmitted, what are the cell towers, all that kind of stuff. I just knew it worked better, okay? And depending upon your degree of interest, and especially when you have to get over the first threshold of, I don't trust this, I think it's a scam. You have to get over that, but you don't have to understand.
But some of the basics, just because then I will ask you some of the problems.
Yeah.
But the basics is that your access to that digital wealth is through a password.
Yeah, so if you...
The reason I'm asking this is because then some people will say, what happens when quantum computer comes, or if AI will able to crack the code, and then your money will not be safe. So just I wanted to go there.
Sure. So again, I think you go back to the values and the features of a good sound money. What works well is a good sound technology of money. So would you prefer to have to ask permission to use your money? Would you prefer to have to ask a bank or to go through them and they collect a fee for that? Would you prefer that your money could be controlled or wiped out if a government decided we don't want your money, you using your money for that? Would you like to be able to...
or freeze your assets. They did that to the Canadian truckers a few years
Correct.
ago. No? They actually
Correct.
went straight to their bank accounts and froze it.
Froze it.
Yeah.
Would you like to preserve the value of your time and labor that you're storing in money? Or would you like it to be guaranteed pretty much to decline by at least 7 or 8% in the best economies in the world, and 50 or 100% in some of the worst?
So the advantages are so big that it's only our worrying mind that is focusing on the little things that are problematic.
Yeah. So, people who benefit from a current system are always going to throw out reasons why another system is flawed. Quantum computing is a good example. So, if quantum computing gets to a point where it can crack the codes, I'm much more worried about cracking the nuclear codes and destroying the planet than I am about whether it's going to affect a transaction or the store of my wealth. So, believe me, they're going to crack the banking system long before they will crack the Bitcoin system.
Yeah. And the possibility of, let's call it the government or the deep state or whoever it is, to somehow slide behind the Bitcoin system and eventually have you, because they would have all of it. That I have heard also as a possibility, that you think, like you're describing me, is my money, we transact, we do the transaction without asking for permission, but once you get into digital currency, I know people get nervous of the fact the gold under my bed is not registered anywhere, but once I'm in the digital world, someone knows what I'm doing. Why not that eventually would be the government or the deep state. So that fear is at the back of, I think, maybe older people, but I've heard some older people saying, yeah, like I can see that normal money is not safe, but I'm gonna have gold or silver or any other thing, but Bitcoin is still scary for some people.
Right. And you know, gold and silver have acted as money for thousands of years.
But you don't see that as a possibility, that the whole thing is a scam by, like the conspiracy theory, that even Bitcoin is a scam to eventually have all your money?
So, and it'd be very clear here that I want to separate, because many people confuse Bitcoin and lots of other cryptocurrencies. So I'm very clear. Bitcoin only. Most of the rest of the other cryptocurrencies are scams. They are absolute total scams. They have none of the qualities of Bitcoin. So
Bitcoin is unique to the rest.
Bitcoin is fundamentally unique and different because there is no centralized authority. There is no board of directors. There is no president. There is no controlling body of Bitcoin like there is of Ethereum or Solana or Cardano or all these other coins or Dogecoin or whatever, or somebody who's just creating it, trying to sell it and make themselves rich. It was created
by a myth.
By a group of people building on technology development that had been going on for many years. And one can point and say, oh, part of that technology was by deep state actors and CIA and the US and all that kind of stuff. And that could be, okay? But it forked in a direction that was no longer controllable. It's the difference between a closed source technology, like your Apple iPhone, versus an open source technology for a Linux system where you can go and audit the software and see exactly how it operates. So even if it went open source and distributed. And I think the biggest thing is we have to, we always have to make choices. And we sort of have to compare. What are my alternatives?
And I get you, because the one we are now is a sinking ship. It's so obvious. So even if it's a risk to jump in the raft.
Right. And most people don't understand this because, again, we've gradually moved to doing our banking on our phones. You transmit money, you hold your phone up, you pay for it. It seems digital now. In some places in Europe, we use more paper currency. In other places, you use very little. So everything kind of seems digital now. But the move that the EU is doing towards a central bank digital currency, where all of your transactions will be done digitally, okay, issued by a central authority. So your pension payments, all your payments, all your transfers, everything will go through a centralized authority that has controllable, programmable money. And this is not conspiracy theory. This is what they're saying. This is exactly what they're saying.
What is the timing for this? When is the...
EU says, they're in test phases now, and I think they're saying they're going to start rolling it out next year, test phase.
And that means that every single individual in the European Union would have to be plugged to this central bank for absolutely everything.
That's where they would like to go.
So that would require a digital ID almost.
It'll require digital ID. Now, again, it will be sold to all of us as a great benefit of a system because you open your account with your digital ID and we credit you with 1,000 digital units of currency. Oh, well, give me mine.
Until you say something that they don't like.
Right. So I think the easiest example is we can think about whatever your thoughts about the COVID days, okay? We know that governments were using certain directives to control people's behavior. You couldn't leave more than 5 kilometers from your house, or you weren't able to buy this product or that product. Well, if you still had paper currency, there were people who would take paper currency, all right, or even your, bank transfers outside of prohibited activities. But if you can program your money so they know exactly where you live. And if you go more than 10 kilometers from that zone, your money is no good. You're totally controlled. I mean, this is the worst of these dystopian futures that the novels were written about 100 years ago. We are creating this.
And it's not in the phase of kind of letting it float. It's already in the phase of almost becoming reality.
They're going to slide it in and sell the benefits until it's too late.
And
And that's the concern.
COVID was an interesting test ground because I have always felt on the categories like I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't care if people look at me, watch me, because I don't know, I'm a normal person living my normal life. But COVID redefined what right and wrong is and what your space for decision is when you are being told this is the one single thing that you can do. Then it's very narrow, really, really narrow. Yeah.
And you must do it, or you can't work, or you can't do this, you can't send your children to school, whatever it may be.
So this is the reason that a lot of people are associating Bitcoin as a representative of independence and a somewhat personal freedom.
Yes, yes.
Because it would be a money that it cannot be switched off.
Correct.
However, usability, it is everywhere, everybody takes it, or would it require that you also accept Bitcoin as a thing, or would I be able to have my Bitcoin and it works and is alive, but the person over there tells me, no, but I don't take Bitcoin.
Right. And that is...
So that's still a possibility, or is it, can I pay Bitcoin everywhere? No.
No, you cannot. And that's a function of the usability of a currency.
But it is legal.
It is legal in most jurisdictions. Some have tried to outlaw it.
Okay, but it's legal yet not implemented everywhere. So that's the state that it
people
is.
People don't accept it. And again, this is where in most of Europe and the EU, we don't have a problem paying for goods and services. But let's take it to Africa. Okay, and this is the story most people don't understand. So much of the population in Africa, as a great example, or the global South, does not have access to a developed banking infrastructure. You live in a small village in Africa. You don't have a bank in town, okay? You don't have a way to get currency. And if you have a way to get currency, that currency is run by generally a corrupt government whose rate of inflation is 50 or 100% a year. So you're losing value as long as you use that currency. You can't transact with your neighbor easily. So if you could transact with a phone, which most people do have, and transmit value, that's a great benefit in technology. If you are in parts of the world where women cannot have a bank account, their husbands or a male relative controls their access to money. If you are in parts of the world where you may be in a community where another government controls the money that you can or can't use, then having something outside of that system is not a nicety.
It's a necessity.
It's a necessity.
But at the moment, the way to actually use this money would be through online transactions.
Yeah.
It's not yet, or is there a device that you go with your Bitcoin thing and you do like this in the shop?
Different parts in the world. So I lived for a while in Madeira, island in the Atlantic off of Portugal.
The reason I'm asking these questions is that because a part of it is maybe understand why it is important for you to use it, but I'm also trying to get the user experience, what it's actually like to live in a world that you use Bitcoin.
Yeah. So it's really, how do you pay for most things right now? You either whip out a card and you hold it up to a reader and it zaps it, or you hold your phone up there. It's really no different. Now, it's just that isn't as widespread. But 20 years ago, it wasn't widespread to hold your phone up to a reader and zap your money out. Some places in the world are promoting it more, are encouraging it, are getting more places to use it. So again, a community like Madeira in Portugal devoted a lot of time and energy, a group there, to getting merchant adoption. So there's 120 or so places there. Most of the pharmacies, my favorite Indian restaurant, you can just hold up the phone, you can pay in Bitcoin.
So it would be dependent of individual people
Yeah.
accepting the method.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Give me a second.
That's kind of like freedom, isn't it?
Yes. 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 Also, well, let me finish this. Also, one thing that I see with the people that use Bitcoin that is a surprise, but I think it's true. It builds a certain sense of community. Like people are kind of like creating a Bitcoin vibe. Yeah, like a tribe thing. Yeah.
It is. And that's why I think one of the things that I've experienced and you have to realize is that Bitcoin is about a whole lot more than money. Okay. Bitcoin isn't just a whole.
Let's make that a chapter. Yes.
Bitcoin isn't just a technology of money. It is that. But for Bitcoin to be successful, the intent behind it takes a whole lot more. And that's ultimately why I wrote my book. Because I wrote a book called Money, Love, and Bitcoin. Now, you may know nothing.
It's a good moment to plug.
There we go. Shameless plug. But, you may know nothing about Bitcoin, but you know it has something to do about money. But what's this crazy word love doing in the middle of it? How does that fit in? And why I wrote this book is ultimately because unless we zoom out from just money and finance and politics and government and banking into reframing what our vision of society is that we want to create. Do we want to move in this direction or do we want to move more in this direction? And what are the characteristics if we want to move more in this direction of individual freedom and sovereignty, while also understanding that we live in an interconnected and interdependent web of life on a planet where we all affect each other, and yet we are unique and individual expressions of whatever you want to call it, life source, energy, whatever.
So the claim is that Bitcoin is not only a more efficient technology of exchange than current money, but that because of the way it's built and its intrinsic characteristics, is more able to create a more beautiful world. That's kind of the claim.
Well, it's not the claim of everybody in the Bitcoin space by any stretch, but it is the vision that I want to create. It is my hope in looking at Bitcoin as perhaps a building block for a freer, fairer, and more peaceful world. And of all, when you think about, and I analyze as I've done and realize, wait a minute, we have a fundamental problem with probably the most pervasive and significant feature of our society, our money, okay? And if we have a fundamental problem with that, don't we need to fix that and then build the society we want to see on top of it? Otherwise, we're building it on a crumbling foundation, which will always be able to be manipulated and distorted to rob us of our life energy, to rob us of our freedom, to control us, and to extract from us. So that's not my vision of a new system. So what I'm trying to bring forward is the idea is this is just a piece of a much larger framework that will build over time, hopefully, and to try to create, there's a teacher in the U.S., Michael Beckwith, spiritual teacher, and he says, pain pushes and vision pulls. So I think there's a lot of pain.
I know this teacher, yes. And
there's a lot of there's a lot of pain in the current system. And we're all seeing that, we're all feeling it. We see the Instagram and TikTok videos of the mom in the car with two kids in the back, bawling her eyes out because she's got to work 2 or 3 jobs and still can't pay the bills. And that pain is pushing one to look for a solution for that. But you could look a lot of different ways for that. But I want to articulate a vision also that will pull people to realize Bitcoin's not about getting rich, okay? Some may, some will, okay? Especially if you're early in the system. That's just the way the world works, okay? If you were the first person to adopt the automobile technology, you made more money than the person who was putting all their money into horse and buggies. That's just the way it is. But it can create a better world for everybody if we add values and integrity and the morals and more universal principles on top of it, which is ultimately love. And so...
And you think it has the power to, from within, change the system without the actual financial system changing? Beautiful to have the amount of hope, but do you think it has, at least potentially, as a tool with enough intention behind, to change the system from within?
I think it has the potential to change the system ultimately from without.
Okay.
Right now we're in a period where it's being incorporated into the existing system.
But your view is that it would be a parallel system?
There was a futurist back in the last century, R. Buckminster Fuller. He did geodesic domes. He was a grand visionary. And he said, you don't change existing reality by fighting against it. You create a new reality. You create a new system that pulls people towards it. So this goes back to the Bitcoiners, if you've seen, they seem to create a community. There seems to be a shift. And not all, but many of the most dedicated Bitcoiners realize that this isn't just about the money. This is about a whole lot more. And they begin re-examining lots of things. So, for example, I talk in the book about relationships and even sex. It's probably the only book about money and Bitcoin that talks about relationships and sex of all things in it. What have those got to do with each other? Okay.
Tell me.
Well, in a society where your money loses value the longer you hold it, okay? So if you take that $100, your expectation was in a year, you'll be able to buy in a year what you could buy with today. But in fact, if you know it's only going to be worth 90 cents, what does that do to your thinking? It says, I might as well spend it now. It encourages, in economics, they call it time preference, but it encourages a short-term orientation, a limited view of things. I might as well spend the money because, it's not going to be worth more. I want instant gratification. We have a system which is all based on debt and credit. You want something, buy it on credit. Buy it now. You can have it now, okay? It takes us and orients us towards a very short-term thinking in many facets of society. And this is something we don't understand, how pervasive, because we know money is pervasive in everything. But let's think about how it affects our time frames, okay? And I think it is, I'm not saying it's the sole cause of it, but it is very consistent with the short-term thinking leads to short-term relationships, is conducive to a hookup culture, a porn culture, something where you're not actually investing, okay, in the long-term future of humanity or a family or your children or doing the hard work to create a lasting relationship. Now, that's not right for everybody. A relationship doesn't have to be defined by one standard or another, okay? Architecture. You put up a building that lasts 20 years as opposed to the Parthenon, okay, or the Colosseum, or buildings that last hundreds or thousands of years. It affects short-term orientation. And
Yeah, because we need a certain sense of dependability. We have this entropy, this impermanence, that everything is falling. And then on the very polar end, we have expectations that make us hold on and attach. But human life requires a certain sense of some bridge between them two, so you don't become nihilist and just don't give a shit about anything but now. And yeah, like a certain dependability, a certain, I don't want to call it expectation, but yeah, an expectation that we'll be there for each other in one way or another. And if $100 become 90 cents, it's like the ground under your feet is shaking all the time. So there's no house to build. Yeah.
and I think also we have to, I've come to the view in life and in Bitcoin and money that, you know, our perspective about life is going to influence everything we do. And for the last several hundreds of years, Western culture has been very focused on materialism. And I don't just mean I want a Lamborghini, okay? But everything is constructed of the material phenomenon of the world, okay? We have discarded all, for the most part, all of the ancient wisdom traditions that guided humanity in all cultures all around the world for most of all humanity. Whether you called it the gods of fire or air, whether it was a monotheistic God, whether it was the forces of nature, whether it was systems of culture that set boundaries on how we operated, that made the individual recognize that it's not just about me, okay? There is something larger here. And if you have a very materialistic perspective and the great advances of science, which discarded a lot of the erroneous dogma of many of these spiritual traditions that got warped, okay, by man using them for their influence and power. But the pendulum swung the other way. Now, everything is just materialist. Everything is just atoms in the physical world and there is nothing else. And yet, that religion of science, if you will, can't explain fundamental things that we all know to be our experience. Consciousness. Right? You can take the view that consciousness is some random occurrence of chemicals in this matter in our head or our heart or somewhere, and it is random, rose up for no perceivable reason, and when the matter dies, consciousness probably dies. That's one view, okay? Another view is that perhaps consciousness gave rise to materiality. Perhaps consciousness extends beyond materiality. Perhaps something interconnects everything. And this is where I go back to my early explorations of philosophy and spirituality, was because when I was in high school, I read a book called The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra. And it was drawing the parallels between modern quantum physics and what it is showing us of the world, that our high school chemistry and physics of these billiard balls of atoms and these Aristotelian ideas, that's not the way reality really is. It's useful when working with the material world, okay, to build bridges. I want people to build bridges understanding material forces. But everything is energy. Everything is vibrational frequencies condensed into materiality. This is what the Eastern mystics and mystics of most traditions have been telling us for thousands and thousands of years. They just didn't need a particle accelerator to get there. They got through explorations from human consciousness. And so I think if we begin to recognize that what science and what most spiritual traditions are showing us are not opposed, but they're the same. We live in a field of energy. We all interdependent and interconnected. Systems theory, I mean, you are not alone an isolated sovereign individual. And if you think you are, psychologically, we'd call that having delusions of grandeur, okay? Yet, we're all each unique, creative expressions of this life force energy. And that needs to be respected. And I need to respect your expression of life force energy. You need to respect mine and the rest of the 8 billion people on the planet and how we choose to interact. So a system that allows us to act with autonomy, sovereignty, but yet requires an interconnection to everyone else on the planet without an intermediary. I don't need an intermediary to have a discussion with you. I don't need an intermediary to decide who I can't love. I mean, again, these are experiences. Imagine the scientific experiment and the materialistic philosophy that can explain love. Get out your petri dish and drop the right chemicals in there and create love. And this is coming from someone who used to be materialist. Okay? Yet,
What's the jump from survival to love, you think?
what's the jump from survival to love?
Yeah, like one could accept that the most minimal type of love is survival, the instinct to survive for you and your child and your family. I don't even know if that already is a bit of love. But from this point, at some point, we move past my survival, and then I experience something that makes me care for things that are not me, and that we call it love, yeah?
You know, I would say I think it is just, for me, and this is, you go along a path to get there, but it is a love of life, an awe of creation, a wonderment and an appreciation of the variety of life, the expanse of nature beyond my possible conception of a universe that extends beyond my comprehension, whose source I cannot understand or comprehend, and yet I am part of, I am connected to, I am interdependent on. My ultimate expression in the book is everything is consciousness, and consciousness is love. That's the principle upon which, even though it doesn't always show up that way, it doesn't appear to our human minds that way. I'm not saying people act out of things less than love. We have free will, okay, I think. But the creative force that creates everything and behind consciousness, whatever it may be, is love. And you know what? If you go, I don't buy it, why don't you act as it? What's going to be wrong? How are you going to destroy the world if you act on the principle that everything is connected by love? Going to be a better world or a worse world? Fine. Don't agree with that principle. You act like it, I think we're all going to be a lot better off.
I like very much the way of your exposition, because we are talking about the technology itself and what it can do, rather than it being an asset for investment. However, many people are using it that way. Yeah? You have the mining, that I don't know if it's profitable unless you do it in large scale, and then you have of course, speculating. Is still Bitcoin, is it a good way to create, maybe that's not the word, you corrected me, to see your wealth grow? or is just good for transactions?
Right. Well, it can be both. Okay. It could be neither. If you live somewhere where the person that you want to transact with won't take your Bitcoin, then it's not good for a transaction. Mm-hmm. You've got to think of, the purposes of money. One is to do transactions. I don't need that in Europe, really. Okay? However,
in case of weird political instabilities, you might need.
Yeah, you might need it, exactly. If they say, sorry, you've exceeded your quantity of wine this month or whatever.
I am sometimes considering if I should have a couple of chickens, and then I did a bit of a research, and they were saying in the end you pay as much caring for your chickens than you pay for the eggs in the shop. Mm-hmm. If there are eggs in the shop.
If there are eggs in the shop. Right. So, transacting is one thing, but the other is as a store of value, that I have $100 now and I want it to buy the goods and services of at least $100 in the future. If my choice is I hold a currency, and again, if I'm in Lebanon and that currency is devaluing 100% a year, I can't hold that. I got to do something else with it. And this is where in the West, we've developed this whole investment culture. When I ran my business, most of my clients, they were just normal people saving for their retirement, managing their money in retirement, saving for the kids' education. They did not want to invest. They didn't know what stocks and bonds were. They didn't really want to assume the risk with it, but they knew they had to do something.
Because if you put $100 in a box, in 20 years, those $100 are not $100.
Correct. They're
so, I mean, so you don't want to do it, but if you don't, you're just seeing the money burn, yeah?
Right.
Yeah.
It created a whole profession and a career that I had that I shouldn't have had, that shouldn't have existed. Mm-hmm. Okay? It did. So it forces people to invest. And then the world becomes hyper-financialized. Everybody's creating new products. Everybody's creating sophisticated ways of trading.
That is the world that we live currently.
That is the world within this frame that we live in.
Okay, so continue.
But here's one of the problems for a lot of people. It's like, I don't have enough money to invest. I'm not really in that world. Or here's where it hits everybody in something they fundamentally need. Most people have probably accepted that property and real estate is one of the best investments that you can make. And the reason why, again, is if you can't save it in a box in the ground, but you save it in something like property and real estate, which is scarce,
you can touch it.
It may be a better vehicle to preserve your value of your money. But, and I used to tell my clients all this time, we want to invest in real estate. Yes, and you got to realize the first purpose of a house is a place to live. Okay, that's the value of your house, not as an investment. So what do we get when people decide to invest in real estate and build buildings, build condos, build apartment houses, buy them, and leave them vacant for a large part of the time?
It's a shame, literally.
What does it do to the price of the rest of real estate? Yeah. It drives it up. So the productivity of building a house should be making the house price fall. But the fact that everybody wants to invest in real estate because you can't put it in money, you may not like stocks or bonds or know enough, I'll put it in a building, okay, drives the price of real estate up all over the world, which makes it tougher for people to live, to raise a family, to have shelter, because investors are trying to get their money out of the bank or perhaps their country where it's no longer safe. I saw this in jurisdictions where you may not want to have your money in certain countries with high rates of inflation or controls that say you can't transfer your money out.
So the day will come that you actually want or need your money, and you cannot.
And, if you're faced with, I have $500,000 euros equivalent value, and I know my government could seize it, freeze it, prevent me from transferring it, or is going to inflate away the value. Well, I'll take that 500,000 and I might buy a property that's worth 300,000 to the market, but I'll pay 500,000 for it because in a year or two, it's going to go away anyway. So,
So at the moment, instead of buying that property, you think a better direction is to begin to slide into Bitcoin?
Well,
at least partially.
That's where for some of us, again, first of all, we have to realize, why are real estate prices going up so much? People are looking at it as a safer way to save money because the money's broken. Mm-hmm. Maybe we fix the money and not just try to tweak with a real estate system, because unless you fix the money, we've got a broken system. But it's store of value. And that's where a lot of people who, don't need it to transact currency are saying, maybe I'd rather store my value there. I will accept the fact that it's very volatile. You say, how can it be a store of value if it, 8 months ago it was worth 100,000, US dollars for one Bitcoin, and now it's worth 60,000, okay? Doesn't seem like a good store of value to me. Well, in the short term, yeah, very volatile. It's a new technology. But I see it, and I've come to see it, is I need to store the value of my labor somewhere. I can't store it in currency. I know it can be controlled. I could store it in stocks and bonds the way I used to. But bonds are just giving money to the government to go do stuff I don't want them to do, like go to war. That's why I say peaceful. They create debt so they can go to war. I don't want to buy stocks of companies that are contributing to a control mechanism. I don't want to own Palantir.
And besides moral issues, is not that money also dollars?
Isn't it also?
Dollars and
Yeah,
euros.
yeah.
It's still the same fiat money, yes? So even though if your stock goes up, it's still within the same inflation rules, right?
Yeah, you have to beat that.
Yeah.
So everybody looks at, the stock market's returned, 8% a year in the US, for example, or it's comparable in Europe. So I'm beating inflation, which is 2 or 3%. Well, the reality is how much money they're creating is 7 or 8%. That's why the market's going up by that much, because it's devalued by that much. But the other way I look at it ultimately, and have come to view, is it's a boycott of a system which I think is corrupt, which I don't think has integrity, I don't want to contribute to, and I want to do as little as I can. I think that the system that's been created by the military-industrial complex, the financial-industrial complex, the technology-industrial complex, the healthcare-industrial complex, the corporate crony capitalist system we have, or corporate crony socialist systems we have, is abusing and stealing from us, and I don't want to feed that beast. I liken it to a dragon, to a fire-breathing dragon. And if I steal some of its fuel, because it runs on money, and if I say, you know what, I'm pulling your money out of your system. I'm not going to buy your bonds so that you can buy tanks and missiles. I'm not going to contribute to the defense industry stocks and the Palantirs and the control technologies and the Googles that want. You have to a certain extent. We do live in this world, but
this is
my investment capital, no.
A case of financial disobedience or something like that in a small.
It is civil disobedience. Mm-hmm. It's no, I'm going to pull out. Mm. So that's where, again, it turns, people had this image because of crypto, of all these guys getting rich quick and the Lamborghinis and all the scams, and there's a lot of that out there. We have people in politics that are absolutely part of that, okay? But that doesn't mean everything is that way, and that the core of people who are true Bitcoiners, and the reason we're in it, after you dig deeper and deeper and deeper, is ultimately something much more than money.
And it's nice to hear, because while listening to some of the first waves of this world, I couldn't shake the feeling that in the end it's a different system, it's a different wording, different way to sell it, but it's still people trying to save themselves and give you advice of how you can save yourself in this new clever way. But I found there's a similar kind of dialectics, which is still saving myself. The way that you are bringing it forth, it sounds a little bit like the beginning of the building of something alternative or something new, a new possibility. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to. I think I know what you're going to answer, but does the dragon let us do this? What is the dragon next move? Is going to. Why would they allow this? Or is it that they cannot not allow it? What's the
Well, that's just it. And
exit out of prison card?
it takes some time to recognize why the dragon can do certain things, but ultimately why it's going to be so hard to destroy it. So if your money is all contained and the record of it is all contained at a central bank, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, Credit Agricole, credit, wherever it may be, JP Morgan Chase, they hold the ledger. They tell you what you got, what you don't got. If they want to say, guess what? We don't like what you did. You don't have it anymore. Okay. You have to ask permission to use it. We've got a problem. If instead you had a distributed ledger, that he's got this, she owes this, that is run on 10 or 20,000 computers all over the world, all of them who have a record of every single transaction on that time change that ever took place, that could be recreated and restarted even when the power went down in the United States and wiped out 50% of the network. There's some guy in Nigeria who's got power and a computer with that entire time chain, and the power goes up, reload that whole time chain, everybody's got the transactions, everybody knows who owns what. How do you stop that? It's a lot harder to stop than going to JP Morgan Chase and saying, freeze their assets. Don't let them, the Iranian assets are frozen. The Russian assets are frozen. The Venezuelan assets are frozen. They're going to freeze them. They'll freeze the Canadian truckers. Okay? You did something we disagree with. You created an act of civil disobedience which disrupted us.
So should the dragon decide, I'm not going to let this happen, it's a process. It's difficult. It's
Right.
much more difficult to cut your liberties if you're operating in this mode.
Well, which is naturally why the dragons are breathing venom and hatred. This is for criminals, it's for scammers, it's a Ponzi scheme, it's all that. I mean, you listen to, the European Central Bank president, you listen to most in the US, changed a little bit lately and throughout the world. No, they don't want it because it threatens their power. So, I think something that threatens a corrupt power structure.
And at least it creates, I guess what I was saying before is like the direction that we have at the moment, I think is rather predictable where we're going. And it doesn't look good. So alternatives, even if you don't have a guarantee, it's what else are you going to do than try new things? Yeah.
I mean, I think, and I can't preclude, over time as I see things developed, I don't decrease my optimism, but perhaps it expands my time frame. It may well be that we are going to, as a society and in certain places, experience much more of the dystopian science fiction horror visions that have been created for us. You know, going back to Aldous Huxley and Brave New World, or George Orwell in 1984, or the Hunger Games, or whatever it may be, or the Mad Max and Mel Gibson, all these, I mean, this is the vision that the media has put out to us, okay? This is what we think is coming in a way. And, you know, when you put that into consciousness, we almost start creating that. And those who would like to create a structure where they're primarily control humanity are happy to do the things that get them there. And yet, as our world begins to, I would say evolve, but I think devolve, into more of these control structures, less respect for our individual sovereignty and rights, less respect for the value of our labor and our contribution to the world, less respect for our ability to have relationship, economic or otherwise, with another single individual or 8 billion people, and they want to control that. I mean, you control it with freedom of movement, with passports, where you can or you can't go. You know, we may create a world where it's going to get tighter and tighter. But in every one of those, in most of those, movies and books, there is a hero. And I talk in my book about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And this is where, you know, in mythology, through all cultures, there have always been, as I mentioned, you know, talked about earlier, for lack of a better term, a guardrails, a system or a structure that put the individual within a greater context of something. And some individuals, stories were told as leading a much greater individual journey, a heroic journey, to go and find deeper universal truths and wisdom, and to bring that back and to share that with others, so that we could see something beyond ourselves and our own small individual situation, which, you know, our sensory apparatus and just living on this planet naturally orient us toward doing, but to give us a vision and to inspire us. And so in all those dystopian books and movies, there's also generally a hero that sees a different vision for how it could be, who imparts a deeper wisdom. And the reality is, we're all on our own hero's journey in life. And so we need to be a hero in this journey, in whatever way that is. And I think if we can inspire people to create a vision that pulls us toward, whether we have to go through, like many of us individually go through, that dark night of the soul where we go through a very difficult period in our lives, we experience things that we would prefer not to experience, but out of that grows a deeper wisdom, a trial by fire that sets us in a different position, in a different pathway that we don't collapse into, then we can become leaders and visionaries and contributors to, you know, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. Mm-hmm. You know, I had an exchange on Twitter X with somebody who's a very well-respected macro economist. That means a guy who's looking at it as what's going to happen in the four corners of the frame of the fiat world. And he's trading things and what have you. And I just challenged him on this idea of trading. It's not value adding. It's not consistent with the Bitcoin ethos. And he gave me a quote from Patton. He says, well, you know, I'm just
Patton.
trying, George Patton, the Army
Already
general.
there.
And I'm like, you know, well, I just want to kill the other guy so that I can survive to then be able to, you know, create something I want. I'm like, well, I think Gandhi's a much better inspiring vision to be the change you want to see.
It's like, I was thinking today, it's 2026. We have weapons that, not just weapons, but industry that can destroy the world many times. And we're still having narcissistic, detached from emotions kind of people running the show, strategizing around principles of war, domination, and competition. It's failed. This system, it's failed. It doesn't matter that we are still having beautiful moments here and there. The system itself is intrinsically, as it is, unfixable, because the essence of the system is detached from love. I don't know if building a new system on the side is it has enough power, because the dragon that is eating everything is very powerful, yeah. But it feels almost like, what else are you gonna do? It's like, what else are you gonna do?
That's
like,
right. And, you know, because it is a new technology, it has lots of things associated with it that are difficult for many people to implement on a daily basis, volatility in price and all those things. So, you know, you have to find how you can apply it or not. But my biggest message is, if you don't understand how the system works, you don't understand how you're being a pawn in the system. And so you can't evaluate something different. And we can have lots of anxiety about where things are going and come up with the solution and buy into the solutions which are offered to us by the same people that created the problem that they're offering the solutions to. So, you know, a hot topic, and I don't want to go much longer, but is artificial intelligence, okay? AI. It's got a lot of people worried. It's going to take the jobs. How's it going to affect things? Technology is going to do what it's going to do, okay? Unfortunately, it's being developed in a very centralized way, that certain power structures are controlling it, just like the monetary system. I think that's a problematic way for doing it. It can shift. But the people who have an economic fear, and this is no longer, you know, this actually isn't just the average worker. This is now the technology worker, the coder, the engineer. You know, what am I going to do to earn money if my job's eliminated by AI? Well, understandable, but an initial idea is, well, the government will give you a universal basic income. The government will pay you. All right. Well, that'll help me, but where's the money this government is getting to pay you? They're just making it up out of nothing, so that what they're paying you is worth less from one year to the next. Oh, and then by the way, we have a central bank digital currency, and we can tell you how you want to spend the money and how you can spend the money that we're giving you, okay? Instead, if we lived in a system where technology and productivity were reducing prices, okay, life was becoming easier because things were becoming cheaper, because people didn't have to put their money in real estate, driving up real estate prices. You could actually save in something that wasn't devalued, and prices fell, and people could trade freely with each other, improve products, prices fall more, then maybe I don't need to work 40 or 60 hours a week. I could earn 10 or 20 by actually contributing value. again, whether it's music or artwork or coming up with a new product, and then maybe you spend that other 10 or 20 hours going deeper into what's really important about life. Going into understanding and thinking about, why am I here? What's important? I mean, we all had this phrase, the most important thing in life is love. But how much of us act that way? You know?
Do you see this as like almost two parallel societies running alongside each other? Like, even if you think it's successful, it would take a long time, yeah? So do you think, let's say, 5-10 years from now, that with Bitcoin you get this other world of possibilities, underworld maybe even?
It could be.
How
I mean,
do you see it?
it's, there was it was at a U.S. It was an old Yogi Berra as a baseball coach, kind of a guy who said funny statements, but he said predictions are hard, especially about the future. So I won't predict the future, but there are possible scenarios. One is, and it was a hope for, that we'd be able to begin to create a transition system where there was movement towards a better and fairer system that happened more rapidly without catastrophic events happening. That'd be nice. You got to begin to create this, and maybe people will start merging over. Some of that's happening. The existing system will fight it as long as they can. Maybe it is going to be creation of, it's often talked about as citadels, places where people who share a similar system of values and integrity, who want to work and live under a value addition rather than extraction system, who want to, have control over their food, have control over their livelihood, who want to use a different monetary system. Maybe those will be created as a parallel system.
That sounds both like could be beautiful, but it also sounds super dystopian, depending who is. Sounds like a bunch of people with their own army. It could also be
it
a bunch
could be
of
all
hippies,
those things.
A bunch of hippies in the forest. I heard this guy that was saying he was a Bitcoiner, and his fantasy, it was like, no, this is impossible to stop, because as long as you have, he said, a waterfall that generates electricity, you put your Bitcoin in mining machine, and eventually you're going to have a net value of plus, because eventually we'll make some. So the fantasy can go in that direction as well, but citadels of, okay.
Well,
Alternatives, yeah.
The issue with that is while, without getting into Bitcoin, mining in that system is a way to ensure integrity in the system. And some people who do that can gain some wealth out of the system. That's not the use of money, going back to your very first question of what is money. So that's not a solution to the problem. It might work for one guy in front of a waterfall to create something out of nothing, out of, of some work, but it's hard to say.
It's the equivalent of mining for gold, right? It takes a lot of effort to get a little tiny bit.
And that's what gives integrity to the system. I mean, if it costs nothing to produce gold, then we'd have a whole lot more of it, and it wouldn't be worth much. At some point, if it becomes very valuable, well, then they're going to go mine it on Mars or Pluto or wherever and bring it back. But if you have and this is where most people don't understand, Bitcoin is simply a set of rules that people who choose to work in the system agree to, a fixed set of rules, as opposed to a set of rules which is set by different groups of people meeting in secret around the world who gain great advantage by the rules that they implement or change or their buddies do. I would rather live in a clear system of rules with a group of people who all agree to those rules than a group that's arbitrary, opaque, and which I know that people have a vested interest in.
We are in for a ride, eh? The next few
Yeah.
years are going to be
Well,
wild.
To real time personally, so I, in going through this journey and envisioning and trying to create a vision and be more inspiring, both the people in the Bitcoin community and the people who outside it who just thought of it as money and trading and, some crypto scam, realize, it's more about money. In the hope that we would advance things a lot faster. And what's my role to play in it? What's my role now for the rest of my life? What's my role recognizing, okay, I don't know whether this is 5 years, 50 years, 500 years, 5,000 years, okay? But I think the advance of consciousness is towards growth and evolution. And I think that's ultimately this is a judgment, the right direction towards love, all right? Towards greater awareness and understanding of the interconnection of life. When and how long it's going to take to get for a large enough group of people who are the leaders in how things filter down, how long it will take, I don't know. I hoped it'd be shorter term. This is where I don't shift my optimism, I just shift the time frame. And I began to think,
Say that again. I don't shift my optimism.
I'm optimistic.
I don't shift my optimism.
I just don't know
time frame.
my time frame.
Okay, I like it.
And so I have to shift beyond, this is in my lifetime. I began to shift, maybe this is beyond my next lifetime. And what do I need to do beyond that?
I think we are stepping into a territory where we are planting trees under which shadow we will not sit.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Exactly. And I was in India less than a year ago, and it was part of my question, what's mine to do? How do I set up my state of consciousness for something that's, in that? And ultimately, I got to a point where that question dissolved. What consciousness or my role in consciousness, and I particular, that will be revealed over time. Mine's to do what I can do right now, to spread a message as I can to anybody who's listening, to recognize, think a little bit more deeper. Don't dismiss. Don't judge as quickly. I think we see so much in our politics which expresses contempt and not curiosity, and certainly not compassion. And we need to be a little more curious about the pain everybody's experiencing, be a little bit more curious about why and possible solutions, and a lot more compassionate with each other about what we want to do to get there on the journey of life. Yeah. And the bottom line is, if you act more loving, I think we're going to move in the right direction. If you act less loving, probably not.
You got to do something. You might as well do something that you're aligned with.
Yep. Yeah. And if your alignment's off, recorrect your alignment.
Readjust.
Yep.
Well, in your case, it came later in life. You had been a financial advisor for so many years in the old system,
Yeah. And again, within a system, you have to do certain things. I get that. We work in a predominant system, but you can also begin to figure out, am I going to throw everything else into figuring out how to game the system and be part of it? Or am I going to recognize it for what it is, participate to the degree I have to, as I begin to plant seeds outside of it as much as I can, for myself, for my children, for my community, for others.
Yeah.
And, we can either dream a nightmare, or we can dream a dream of a new planet. Ultimately, and my wife always reminds me, so, what are the action steps that somebody can take? And I wouldn't recommend somebody take their entire net worth and dump it into Bitcoin without really understanding it, or without the ability to deal with the volatility. I didn't at the start. You get there over time. But, begin to step back from the system and see it for what it is. And you can take some simple actions. If you got 25 euros that you can forget about for 4 years, save a little something. You can easily open an account. You can invest in Bitcoin little by little. People get misunderstood and think you have to invest, it's 1,000 euros a coin or whatever. You can put $25 in a week, $10 a week, whatever. Put a little outside the system in case that hyperinflation event happens, okay?
Yeah, you've lived in land your whole life, and maybe it's time to come close to the ocean, and maybe you're not diving from the biggest cliff, but you're starting to put your toes in there just to get used to the water.
Yeah. And so stack some sats, we call them satoshis, with the little units of Bitcoin. Spread more love, and dream. Dream on about a better future. I closed a talk I did playing Aerosmith's Dream On song, if you know that song. It's like, we got to dream a new dream.
That's important, because I feel by seeing through the dirt of the system, sometimes you just feel hopelessness.
And that doesn't serve anybody.
No.
It doesn't serve humanity, it doesn't serve evolution, it doesn't serve consciousness, and it doesn't serve ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. I have the feeling that we could talk another hour. The camera is tired. And I still have more little questions here and there. But as a first touch, it's been really useful, interesting, and I think I see another dimension that I had an intuition for and I had heard of, but not in the way that you are portraying it and explaining. So
well, thank you. It's a topic which I'm passionate about. But I'm not trying to convince anybody of everything.
Yeah.
Just saying, open your eyes, see what's going on, decide what's right for you, and consider.
Yeah, but it is true also that without convincing anyone, the energy and the frequency that we carry, and if I carry this frequency that I feel in myself sometimes, where it's like everything seems dark, and I do a conscious exercise practice to lift my vibration from that place, even though I feel kind of like I can have the tendency to fall there naturally, and bring myself into a place of what can I do? What are my possibilities rather than my limitations? And I fail miserably a lot of the times, but as a life hero's journey kind of motto, what the fuck are you gonna do otherwise?
Absolutely.
So,
go be the hero of your own journey.
Yeah.
And exhibit all those characteristics. So, and if anyone wants to hear a little bit more, I do have a website that's got the book and some of these other. It's moneyloveandbitcoin.com. moneyloveandbitcoin.com, and a number of the other podcasts are on there, and some of my talks and things like that.
Apparently, this will stay with me, so I can read it.
It's available on Amazon all over the world. So,
Paul.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk.
And a new subject for me and a new flavor in the podcast. Very happy was you.
Wonderful.
Very nice.
Be well, everyone.
Thank you.